Hello and good evening. My name is Amir Baker of the Mu Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and I want to thank you for joining me this evening on this part one of our Grow Your Wealth series. This series is going to be a four-part series designed to help you from the inception of obtaining wealth all the way to succession planning. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of tonight's conversation, I want to begin by giving you a bit of perspective on why this conversation is important. One thing that we have learned is that many generations, especially generations for people of color or first generation Americans, with each generation, we have seen countless families have to start from scratch every single generation, having to rebuild wealth, having to maintain that wealth, and ultimately try to figure out how to keep that wealth throughout the following generations. And I believe that this has come from a place of just uninformed people who just don't know what the tools are and what the methods are to be able to do this. So, our four-part series, as I said before, will focus on a few different things. Tonight's session one, will be about obtaining wealth. We'll focus on income growth, self mastery, leadership skills, and other things that you can do to start actually obtaining wealth. Not riches, not money, but wealth. And our subject matter expert today will get into that. Our second session is going to be talking about growing wealth. We'll talk about investment strategies and turning income into ownership. Our third session will be about protecting wealth, risk management, tax strategies, and protection from market volatility. And our final session, session four, will be about wealth succession planning, estate planning, trust, wills, family governments, and legacy planning. And each session will tie into the next. So I hope that if you find value in tonight's session, that you will continue to uh, be a part of the following sessions, which will be held every Wednesday for the next 4 Wednesdays, with today being the first, and get the information that you and your family need to be able to actually take this wealth talk to another level. One other thing that I want to point out before I introduce our presenter for the evening is, even if you are not in a place now where succession planning is on the forefront of your mind, many of us have aging parents, aging grandparents who may be at that point in their lives where succession planning should be a conversation, not just for the individual, but for the family, to make sure that everything is documented and everything is done in a manner that allows the family to have one less thing to worry about after the loss of a loved one. So, without further ado, I would like to present our speaker, Mr. Matt Aaron, and I will allow him to introduce himself and tell you a little bit about his company, and then we'll get right into the discussion.
The mayor, I appreciate the introduction. Brief introduction about myself. I'm Matt Aaron, founder and CEO of Lux Wealth Planning. We're a comprehensive financial planning firm based in Washington, D.C., but we work nationally across the country. I'm a certified financial planner, have a number of other certifications, but one of the things that I really like to share with people is that I'm a bridge builder. And really, at Lux, what we do is we really seek to help bridge the gap, the wealth gap in our community, understanding that there is a gap in knowledge and in application. And so I'm grateful to be having this conversation with you today. Excited to get into it.
Glad to have you, and I appreciate your time and your expertise.
Absolutely.
Uh, so let's go ahead and get into it. We're talking about obtaining wealth tonight. Can you tell us a little bit about what does that mean?
Yeah, I think this is, I love this question because a lot of times when we first think about obtaining wealth, we just think about investing because it's the thing that is very much what I would consider is like the hot topic, especially on social media today. Everybody is an investment guru. And I think that the reality is that there's not enough transparency around what does it take to build wealth and grow wealth, but then when should I be doing certain, when should I be making certain decisions, and what sequence should I be doing it? And so one of the things that I always tell people is that we first have to focus on self and really understand, are we really maximizing our opportunity within ourselves? And this is really where self leadership comes into play, and self mastery, and understanding that there are different types of wealth. And the best thing we can do is grow our earning potential and really understanding our human life value. So that is where we would like to spend most of our time today. But I think that's really the piece that might be is probably the most underscored and talked about. But that's where we have the greatest leverage, is actually increasing our human life value, which is our earning potential over a lifetime. And so really, the more we focus on ourselves and growing ourselves and the different types of wealth, really gives us the huge opportunity.
That's great. Now, you said something there at the end. You talked about different types of wealth. Uh,
Mhm.
Explain that to me, because I think the general public, when they think of wealth, they immediately go to material things and they just think dollars and cents. But I'm sure that it means so much more than that. Can you kind of expound on that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have time wealth. Okay, we have social wealth. We have our mental wealth. We have physical wealth, and we have financial wealth. And so the first one I shared was time. And if you really want to know where someone's priorities are, you look at their calendar. If you want to know where their another place you can look at is their bank account. But before we even think about the bank account, if we just think about, how are we spending our time? Are we investing in ourselves? Are we um, finding ourselves watching Netflix more than we're reading or listening to a podcast? And we have to be honest with ourselves and say, okay, do my intentions and my behaviors line up? And the more we can go through that discovery process with ourselves and really understand, are we maximizing our time or valuing our time, then we can really start to have an honest conversation.
Okay. Um, you mind speaking about the others as well? We talked about, I think you mentioned social as well.
Yeah, and I'm gonna let me even when I think about these five types of wealths, I think the
Mhm.
thing is it's really about, how do we prioritize our energy, right? And that's really where the time wealth comes in. The social wealth is, how are we creating deeper bonds, right? How are we building great relationships that help us to really have more meaning and purpose in life? Um, when it comes to mental health, or mental wealth, are we really challenging ourselves? Are we sharpening the axe? Are we constantly seeking growth? And then the physical health, at the end of the day, the longer we live and the more healthy the healthier we are, we can then earn income for a longer period of time, right? And we can actually then also enjoy the money for a longer period of time. And that gives us the value of compounding. And so maximizing your health and the vitality of your health, I think, is so important. And then your financial health, like, how do you define financial independence, is ultimately the goal. And everybody has a different definition of what that means for them. Because, financial independence, for me, it means ultimately I have the choice, and to be, to really, like, do I go to work tomorrow and can I live the same life? Do I have to wake up and earn an income to support my lifestyle? And a lot of time people think that, we often hear, like, probably like, I want to be a millionaire. But really, what most people are saying is they want to spend $1 million. But there are people, right, who have, they don't even have $1 million and they're financially independent. Between Social Security, a pension, and they can have a couple $100,000 and they can be financially independent if they lived a very conservative life. But you can have somebody who have $1 million or $2 million of assets, but spend $1 million a year and can be poor in 2 years. So it's really about you understanding what does financial independence really mean to you, and not looking left and right to, what is the next person doing.
That is a really great point. And I like the way that you put that, where you said, people say they want to be a millionaire, but really they're just thinking about how they're going to spend $1 million, right? And that's not truly wealth. And I think you said something else that's important is there's wealth isn't really a dollar value. There's no amount of money that you could say is enough that, okay, I'm wealthy. Wealthy has some other attributes to it. And one of the things that if you mind, I would like for you to kind of talk about a little bit here, which I think are very important building blocks when we talk about obtaining wealth. Can you speak a little bit about assets and liabilities? And I know we hear this a lot. I know it's kind of become like a trigger word, but
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people really don't understand that. In that example you gave about the people who won $1 million, I think really
Yeah.
requires that we kind of expound on that.
Absolutely. And we can even think about assets from a standpoint of, not just like financial assets, but humans. Like, okay, am I around people who are helping me to build me up, or am I around people who are pulling me down? If somebody's not creating value in your life, they're not an asset. They're likely a liability. And so you even have to assess, like, who's around you. Other thing, as relates to that is, okay, am I investing? Am I putting deposits to the asset side of my life, or am I creating liabilities by making decisions that are destructive? And so I have to be thinking about that, because usually when, you make deposits on the asset side of your life, the financial resources usually start to come, because now you're in the right mindset, you're in the right posture, you're around abundance, and then ultimately that compounding starts to happen for you. And then ultimately, again, we'll start to see the financial resources, and then we have to be a good steward there. But if we have our financial resources, right, and we're making money, but we are not around the right people, we can lose it real quick. And so that's why it's important to have more of a holistic lens when we start thinking about assets and liabilities. And you can take that same posture when we say assets. These are things that are bringing me value. Sometimes some assets create income, some assets don't create income. And I think that's important to understand, because you can have $1 million of assets that don't generate any cash flow. And that means that if it doesn't generate any cash flow for you, it's really not useful for you, right? Now, that doesn't mean that, it can't have some future value, in your life, but you got to understand, okay, where am I at in my journey, and what type of assets do I need at this current juncture? And is it aligned with the vision and the purpose that I have for myself? And then on a liability side, there's, there's good debt and there's bad debt, right? The good debt, those are things that, can help me to buy assets that can enhance my balance sheet and my net worth. But then there's liabilities that can start to drag and be a drag on my balance sheet, or, be a drag in terms of, moving you away from your vision, because now it feels like almost like a parachute that's on your back, and you're trying to fight moving forward, but it's dragging you back.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the topic of debt, good debt and bad debt, because debt normally has a negative connotation to it. But I'm sure you know as well as I do that most wealthy people have a lot of debt. However, the type of debt they have is very different. And I wanted to kind of pull that out of the conversation a bit, because I think in order to talk about how to obtain wealth, right? And obviously, this series will continue to talk about growing and maintaining and ultimately passing down that wealth. Can you talk about what you have seen as a professional in terms of how people have used debt to increase their wealth? And then can you talk about how you may have seen how bad debt, even at the end of someone's lifespan where they're looking to pass down whatever wealth they may have had, but then debt gets in the way and it starts to become very, very murky waters when people try to get whatever's owed to them.
Yeah. So, okay, so let's break that up. So, first things first, when we talk about debt, it's important to understand your DNA, your investor DNA. And do you have the financial acumen and experience to be able to handle debt? You know, because I've done it and I still do it in terms of leveraging debt to build assets, but I also understand, you know, what is the appropriate amount of debt, because sometimes what I find is that, a lot of times people talk about how you can use debt to build assets, but frankly, I see a lot more people who get themselves in trouble with debt than because they have the right intentions, but because of their lack of knowledge and acumen, they end up managing it irresponsibly, or not realizing that they're maybe taking out too much debt, or they're taking out debt on the wrong assets. And so it's really important to make sure that, if you're going to take out debt, you know exactly how it's getting paid back, and you have a high confidence level on paying back that liability. Otherwise, what could have been a asset that, or a liability that can help you to grow your assets, it can also pull you down and pull you back. And so that's risk ultimately, right? But I think that, especially in the Black community, it's important that we really understand this, because I see more people who lose money, trying to build wealth through debt than they making money. And so, yes, debt can be good leverage, but it has to be used wisely. So again, I'm not saying that people shouldn't do it, or if they should, they just have to know themselves and ask, do I fully understand the debt and the liability that I'm taking on? And do I know exactly how it's being paid back? And do I have a high conviction level about that? And we can't go with hope is not a strategy. Okay. And a lot of times we're hoping that the thing is going to work out, and you should never take out debt if you're just hoping.
Absolutely. I want to circle back to something we were talking about at the beginning. You were saying that when it comes to obtaining wealth, there's a certain aspect of self mastery that takes place in investing in your, I guess, your earning potential throughout your
Mhm.
lifetime. So obviously, we know some of the things that people can do to increase their earning potential. Obviously, higher education, certifications, um, coming to seminars like this. But when we talk specifically about people's financial aptitude, right,
Mhm.
and their ability to uh, get self mastery. There are some people who they'll say they're very bad with money. Either they're too cheap or they're too loose. They
Yeah.
can't save, or, you know, things like that. And so, what are some things that people can do in terms of trying to, maybe if they found a flaw that they have identified within themselves when it comes to money? What are some things that they can do to kind of build that capacity?
Yeah. So I think first things first is understanding your vision. Like, where are you trying to go, and what is your purpose, right? Don't worry about nobody else, because I think sometimes we can be influenced by other people's vision and purpose, and then we find ourselves, not really convicted around the self mastery process, because it's like going to school, but you don't. It's like, how you go to a class, and you don't really care about that subject in that class, because you don't see a connection on how it's going to improve your life or your career. You're like, I'm just showing up because this is what I was supposed to do to get this degree. And and I think it's important to first know, okay, why? Like, why am I seeking growth in this particular area? Okay, or where am I lacking, that I would like to grow in? Because when you do grow in that area, or solve that constraint or that problem for you, what is the outcome that you're desiring on the other side? And so you have to basically have a desire, and have a yeah you have to basically have a desire for the future outcome, and it has to be greater than the, maybe the current distractions that you could have. So you just have to really have that assessment, and then that real talk conversation with yourself and say, okay, the thing I want tomorrow is greater than the thing I can get today. And when I make that decision, that is when I start to put myself in the right posture to even receive the information and let it download in your spirit and your heart, so that you can actually make it now something that you not just listening to, but you're now applying, because you have a greater purpose for the reason you're even engaging in that knowledge. So because somebody can show up even in this live today, in this conversation, hear it and say, man, that sounds awesome. They're charged up, they're energized, but then don't move to action. And so my challenge would be for anybody that's tuning in today is to say, what am I seeking? What area of my life am I seeking growth in? And if it's financial, hopefully it is, right? Because we all need to be growing in all those different silos that I mentioned, right? Time, social, mental, physical, and financial. But particularly within financial, is there a particular area within the financial? Because we can get overwhelmed, right? Because it's like so many different aspects. You got some people talking about crypto, you got some people talking about real estate, you got some people talking about stocks, you got some people, who are just trying to get a budget, right? And so you have to say, where is my current constraint? And let me just focus on that one thing, because the power of unlocking one constraint is that it gives you all the resources and all the energy to go into one direction. And then once you unlock that constraint, you can move to the next one. Because the beauty is there's always going to be another constraint. We always are going to have another problem, because even when you solve a problem, you create a new problem. But hopefully the new problems are good problems to have, right? And so we're going to create bigger and bigger problems, right? The more money you make, the more taxes you got to pay, right? So the more taxes you got to pay, you got to solve that. So there's always a problem we're trying to solve. So I want anybody to hear this to know that this is just about a growth journey. And once we know it's a growth journey, we can give ourselves grace, right, through the process. We can understand that you're not going to solve it overnight, okay? And then we can have some patience, but also some tenacity and conviction and endurance through the process.
That's excellent. So, what it sounds like from a very fundamental standpoint is, when we talk about obtaining wealth, it's really very heavily a mindset thing, right?
100%.
Coming in with the right mindset, and then you can add all these other layers on top. It's pretty accurate.
Absolutely. And it's funny is because I was in this is an example. I was in the sauna this morning, right? And I was listening to an audio book around it was like a financial audio book around wealth. And the person that was in there, they didn't know I was a financial planner, right? So they were saying that, oh, that sounds good. It's easy for them to say that because they got all the money and da 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 da. I'm like, man, what a pessimistic mindset this person has, and so the abundance won't even come to him because he's putting a block on the abundance, because he's not even receiving the information, letting them download on him, because he's already created this mindset that it's not for him. So if he kept saying to himself, this is not for him, he will not receive it as a result. And because our subconscious is so powerful. And so you have to have a vision and you have to have a belief, right? And so when I think about self-mastery, I think about leadership, I think about operational excellence, and I think about belief. And so there's something called the law of the lid. You won't grow, and the people around you won't grow if there's no leadership, there's no operational excellence, and there's no belief. So leadership is, okay, that's where the vision comes in, and that's where we have to know, okay, why am I doing this? What's the mission and vision for this? operations, like how do I even do it? Right? Like I got to have a plan. I got to be able to execute, right? You got to execute and you got to do it with excellence. And then belief is just knowing that, okay, I have the power and the control, and I can take action, and it's 100%, in me to do that. And when you put those three things together, that's when magic really happens. But oftentimes I find that people might be missing one of the three. They might got a great vision, but they take no action, or they have belief, but they don't have a vision. And so there's a lack of clarity, so this is like a three-legged stool. You have to have all of them to be able to make it work.
I think that's a great thing, right? Developing ourselves, developing our minds, and getting rid of those roadblocks, being open to new information. And I think one thing you actually said as well, and I think is important, is as individuals feeling that we are capable and able to obtain wealth and to do these things that we see, or do the same things of the people who we aspire to be like, maybe in a wealth standpoint, and that the same rules apply to them at a high level as it does to us at wherever we are at in that journey.
Absolutely, because even when I think about my journey, every time I moved from one level to another level, there was always more. Right? You will never arrive. The moment you arrive, or at least you think you arrive, you're already wrong. And I can promise you that there's so many different layers as it relates to this growth. Even when I think about what I thought what hard work was like versus like what I thought hard work was, 5 years ago. They're just different levels. It's like 1,000x. Like I can't even contextualize, what that means. And so I just think that, sometimes we have to, have again that honest conversation, and really ask, okay, how important is it to me? And if it's important, we'll figure it out. Or you got to even assess your capacity, because sometimes we, um, have so much optimism around our belief that we don't assess our capacity to actually get it done with excellence. And that's when we have to, and that's why the whole concept of the theory of constraint is so powerful. A lot of people have a lot of like half-baked goals, or like half-baked plans, and they don't ever get across the bridge. It's like they get halfway, but they never make it across because they quickly then get distracted by something else.
So let me ask you this, something that I think is very important, but I realize doesn't happen quite often. I want to know your thoughts around talking about wealth at the dinner table.
Mm,
And I know sometimes it's almost like when you talk about, at some point in this series, we'll talk about wills
mhm,
and, you know, life insurance policies and things like the planning for death, right? Very uncomfortable conversations, but we'll get there when the time comes. But in the beginning, right,
mhm.
it already starts with a conversation around money, assets, wealth, right? What do we have as a family? Where are we trying to go? What is the purpose, right? Are we just amassing wealth just to say that we did it? Is there something we're trying to achieve? I think you mentioned it. What are those goals? And so that you have a clear direction on where you're going. But I think that we don't have the conversations, and if we do have the conversations, we don't have them as frequently enough, right? I feel that we should run our families like Fortune 500 companies, right?
Mhm.
We need a plan. We need to strategize. We need to know where we are. Are we in the black? Are we in the red? How do we move and navigate what's happening around us? And so I just kind of want to hear your thoughts about, because we're talking mindset and we're talking self mastery and things like that. And I think that it's a group effort, especially when you're bringing in the family dynamic to it, and just kind of tell us how that looks, and how we, those who are tuning in, can begin to start those type of conversations in our households.
Yeah, I love this question. And towards in a minute, I'm gonna pull up a slide here. But one of the things first, and this is even friends and family. I think this is for friends and family. It's like first, we just got to be more vulnerable. Like a lot of us like act like we got it all figured out, right? And we don't. And I think if more of us just was willing to be vulnerable and say, hey, here's where I'm challenged right now. This is what I'm trying to figure out. Two things we're going to uncover. And more often than not, you're going to find that somebody else is dealing with that same thing, or they solved it. One of the two. And so if they solved it, great. They can help you maybe solve it. Or if they are struggling with it too, now you have an accountability partner to be able to go, together to go try to go solve this. And it's more powerful with two of us trying to solve it than one. Now we're bringing resources together. And so there's this concept that at our firm we call the family operating system. And I think it's just really powerful to have basically a process in which we manage our families in our wealth journey and how we think about our relationship with money. So in the early 1800s, really wealthy families, they created something called the family office. And this is where essentially they wanted all of their investment advisors, insurance agents, the attorneys, they want all of these professionals to essentially be highly coordinated and working on behalf of the one family. So you got to have a lot of money to have a family office, right? Because they're all working for that one family. And so, you got to have enough resources for it to, have all these professionals working for that one family. But the power in the family office, though, is that there's this coordination that's happening. And so one of the things that we created was this concept. Well, we didn't create the concept of the multifamily office, but we wanted to come up with a fractional way to give, let's say that, certain families that don't have like mega wealth, but, are making good income, but wanting more control and oversight. And they really want to understand where is their money going and how is it maximizing. So the family office is basically just like, think of that as like the advisory board or the advisory team that's helping to manage the family's money. Now, the second thing is that we need to have a family constitution, just like the U.S. Constitution, right? That's supposed to govern our country. We need to have a family constitution. What is our belief system? What are the things that we hold as values to our family? And in that way, we can have a broader conversation around the purpose and the mission and vision and what are we trying to build and what are some of our principles. And now we can start to have this perpetual value system within our families, and we understand money. We can start to collaborate together around our learnings and life lessons, that because what was a lesson to one person, that doesn't have to happen again, right? Imagine if if our grandparents, could say, or great grandparents can say, hey, I tried to invest in this. Here's where I went wrong. Here's where I went right. And those are things that now we can start to pull forward to perpetuate wealth and to minimize the mistakes. We need to start having family retreats. We need to, bring our families together to have the conversation around, what do we stand for, and start to have financial literacy conversations. You can bring in professionals, maybe to do a Zoom or something with your family to talk about the basics of, fundamentals of financial planning. And all of this is centered in the concept is just having rhythms, meetings, and traditions. And it starts to now elevate the conversation around money. And it becomes something bigger than just just a resource to buy stuff. It becomes now something that allows us to enhance life and our purpose, and as a family. And now we take more pride in the resource of money. And it's not just something we just, spend, but it's something that we actually use to amplify what's possible within our family and the community as we continue to expand and have more wealth within our families. And then you got to have also people outside of the family that we can lean on. And that's where the board of trustees that come in. So you had mentioned, just like how a Fortune 500 company would, right? They have board of trustees who govern the family, right? So you can have mentors for the family to really help them to maximize and again to minimize the errors and mistakes. Because here's the thing that happens to most people, most families, and most businesses. They have excessive optimism, they have unexamined assumptions, and they have no risk management. Those are the three things that contribute to most businesses and families' failure when it comes to money. Excessive optimism, everything is great until it's not, right? And nobody, because you don't see people on social media talking about the bad real estate deals or the bad investments that they make. Everybody's winning, apparently, right? But if everybody was winning how social media likes to portray it, wouldn't we have closed the wealth gap? Wouldn't we have made a dent in it? And we haven't. Um, the second thing is unexamined assumptions, because we just believe what we see versus actually doing our due diligence. Don't do anything you don't understand. And if it's something you really want to solve for, seek the knowledge to understand it. And then the last piece is no risk management. Yes, people don't like, insurance. A lot of times, people think they're wasting money on insurance, or they're like, man, the money's just sitting in the bank. There's a reason for it. The transfer of risk is the greatest leverage. What a lot of people think is that wealthy people take a ton of risk. Actually, wealthy people, I find, are they take the least amount of risk. They take the least amount of risk. But a lot of times we've been sold that you got to take these crazy bets, but you don't. You want to take smart, consistent compounding momentum forward. I don't want to go backwards. Will you maybe go backwards from time to time? Sure, but I want to minimize that as much as possible. Because if I go forward consistently, uninterrupted, that's where the power is. We missed.
My apologies. Yes, I was saying that was great. I definitely took some jewels from that, and I like the way that you're able to kind of give us that visual of how we can structure our family organization to be in position to actually get to where we're trying to be financially. Um, I'm going to ask you a personal question.
Mhm.
How did obviously you have gone into this profession. There was obviously a passion that brewed inside of you that said, "This is my purpose. This is how I want to give back, helping people build, manage, and keep their wealth." What role did your family play in your financial prowess?
Mm. Well, I'll say first it started off with my parents, right? To work, working class. I mean, my dad works for the postal service. My mom, she actually did work in investment firm, but on the operation side, and then started to go, but for the most part, admin. Neither one of my parents made six figures, but they put me and my sister through school. We grew up in the inner city, but they put me and my sister through school. Um, and when I say put us through school, we went to private school. I went to private school K through 12. They paid for me and my sister to go to college. I came out of college with $5,000 in student loans. My parents are financially independent. They could choose to never work another day in their life. They paid for my sister's wedding. Um, and but they didn't have the nicest car, but we didn't struggle, a ton. At least they didn't make it seem that way. But it was just a lot of conscious choices that they made to know that they wanted something greater us, and that means they had to sacrifice maybe the nicer house, or they had to sacrifice getting the nicer car. I used to joke, laugh at my father when, I'm like, why, why your car handle, look like this? So like, it was like, it was like little stuff that, he would do. And then when I went to Howard, HU, I went to Howard, um, I, uh, I started to talk to my friends about, like their situation, and I would see some of their parents pulling up in nicer cars, but then they would tell me how much they was taking out in loans, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And I'm like, okay, this starting to click, and then I'm like, okay. So then I got introduced to the financial services space, and that's when I actually started did an internship, and I got to sit down with my parents and their finances, and I'm like, oh, they doing all right, I was surprised because it didn't seem like that when you look at it, right, on a
Hmm.
surface. You don't see wealth, right? Wealth is silent, right? And that's what I learned, and so like me, me and my wife got one car. I drive her car. I don't need a car. I'm in the DC area. Yeah, could I buy a nice car? Sure. But I'd rather invest in my business. I'd rather invest in the community and do those things. And those are conscious choices I made, And when I have a kid, they're going to be financially independent from the time they wake up, like when they're born. And that's that. And that for me was more important, and I never want to have to choose. And the power of being financially independent, or at least having clarity around what does financial independence mean to you, is that you move differently. You feel different. You wake up and choosing what you do, how you do it, and when you do it. And there's just something, there's some level of peace that you get from that, because now everything you do is about purpose. Like you don't have to do it because of the money. You don't, like, it's just something, you just kind of like, especially at a time like now, right, with everything going on in the world, like that level of clarity and peace allows some part of you to have a sense of control and purpose, and you feel like you can make some decisions that maybe most people can't make. And um, and that's, we need more of us having that same feeling, and that's what drives me, is to help more and more people get that.
I think if people take nothing else from this conversation, that wealth is silent is a bar. So
It's silent.
I'm glad you said that, and I'm glad you gave us that comparison, right, about your experience at Howard, where maybe from an image standpoint, right, what most people might think of as what wealth looks like, right, maybe your situation didn't look like wealth, but in reality, it truly was real wealth. And you mentioned that neither of your parents were six-figure earners, so they didn't have to be fiscally, if you will, or dollar wise rich to be wealthy, and
Mhm.
to not only be wealthy for themselves, but they can now be financially free, never work another day if they don't want to, but also to be able to give you a leg up, right? To where you also don't have to take on all these loans versus your peers who may have had parents with big houses, really nice cars, fancy clothes, but they're coming out six figures in debt outside
Yeah,
of
and
college.
and sorry to cut you off,
No, no.
but what is interesting is, well, not interesting, but like the opportunity that we have, like and that's the other thing. I wanted to break the cycle, you know, because what I'm seeing, right, is a trend, is that we're making great money now. Like we can't blame other, like, I know at one point it was a thing, right? We wasn't even able to earn, good incomes, right? But like we can't use that excuse anymore. Like this is in our hands. Like we have the money and the income to now convert that to assets. And the more assets we have is when we get to make more decisions. So when we're mad because we can't make the decisions, like that's some of that we have to take ownership. And I choose to wake up in the morning and say, I take responsibility. I take responsibility, because the moment I give that responsibility to somebody else, I just lost my power. I just lost my power. And when we as a community start to be able to have these vulnerable conversations and say, man, I'm struggling. How do I get from, where I'm at right now to where I want to be? We can then start to realize that we have an opportunity to create change within ourselves and our community. We don't need nobody else. We just got to stop giving our money to the wrong pocket.
Mm-hmm. That's real. And my story is a bit similar as well. I also was put through private school. I was fortunate to only come out with about $6,000 in debt after college. And while I don't know the ins and outs of like my father's financials and how he planned his stuff, I once I became aware, right, financially aware, and uh, I'll, I'll mention that the book that I read that actually even brought me to this level of understanding was Rich Dad Poor Dad. Right, when I read that book, nothing was the same. And after I finished reading that book, I wanted to go into my mother's financials and figure out, you know, are we, are you, I guess. I say we because I have something to gain from it, right? And this is why we even started to have this session in the first place, is sometimes we have to take responsibility for our parents' financial decisions if they don't know any better than we do. So I wanted to dig into it and see kind of where things were. And I never forget the day I fired her financial advisor. I fired him. I said, I want you to have a meeting. I want you to invite the financial advisor. I want to go over everything that he's been doing over the last X amount of years. Where are we now? How much money is there? What are we doing next? Right. So he comes and we have a meeting. And in one of her accounts, I mean, that thing was just bleeding money for months. And I said, don't you think it's about time that you move this money somewhere else? Why are we leaving it here? And it's clearly taking loss after loss after loss. I mean, it's lost a great percentage of its value. And I'm no financial advisor, but I know you at some point you got to stop the bleed, right? Even if the money's going to move somewhere where it's not growing, at least it's not losing. And he wasn't able to give me an answer. He was actually surprised that that account was like that. And in that moment, I knew he was fired. I let him know he was fired by the end of the conversation, but I continued. We went through some more things, and I just saw how, just for me reading a book, I had a foundational understanding enough to know something wasn't right with the way that things were going. And so, um,
Let me. Can I
go
ask
ahead.
you, was the market overall down at that time or no?
It was. Yes, yes.
Okay.
This was probably somewhere around the right around the 2010s, maybe
Okay.
like right before, right after. So we had just had the housing market crash and all of that.
Okay. So we'll,
Yeah.
we'll, we'll get into this in another, and of course, the next series, I think.
Mhm.
But it could have been okay. So there's potential, reflection opportunity there, but because the market being down or your investments being down is not necessarily a bad thing. And a lot of times people think that, they're losing because they see on a statement that there's a negative, but you don't gain investments until you sell, and you don't lose until you sell. So
Mm.
if you sell, you could be taking a permanent loss, which could be temporary. And so sometimes it makes sense to wait and ride it out versus booking that permanent loss that could be temporary. And a lot of times we assess risk wrong. Risk and volatility are two different things. And that's where we have to really understand that difference. And so we'll talk about that in the next, I think the next series. But I think, but I think that but it's nice that that one, she has a son that cares that much, and so I think that is I think that's powerful, and for your mom to trust you to even come in that conversation like that. And I think that's the learning opportunity we can get from that, though.
Absolutely. So what I want to do for our audience is I want to kind of give them a little bit of homework, right? Because obviously each one of these series are going to pour into the next, and so we want to kind of take our viewers on a journey with us, right? So that while we're going through each iteration of this, they're looking at their own personal situations, family situations, what
Yep.
have you, and we're kind of bringing them to a point where they can actually see the full picture, understand
Mhm.
their financial health, and where there may need to be some corrections and things like that. So, from a what do you think are some things that some of our viewers should start looking into just to kind of familiarize themselves with their situation and uh, where we'll go
Yeah.
next?
Yeah, so as we talk about building human life value, right, and really expanding your human capital, there's an assessment I would challenge everybody to take. It's called the Working Genius. And the Working Genius assessment will really help you to understand, what really gives you energy. And I think this is important because a lot of times we find ourselves doing things or are in roles and in jobs that don't really, give us energy. And it could be the same career, but it's just not the right role within that career. And I think this is important because you can get a greater return likely getting a raise than you would by trying to invest differently. So that's why I always start here, is because how do we get you to be in the best position to be have like a lot of energy around what you're doing on a day to day, because that then I believe transfers to how you even feel about how you even spend your money. Because if you're miserable at work, a lot of times people will then spend the money in a way that will maybe make it, be something that is like a coping mechanism, just as an example. So I think that that's something that's important. And then if it's something that you got a lot of energy around, you'll do a lot out of it. You'll do a lot there, even outside of the 9 to 5. You might even be able to, you might even say, okay, from 9 to 5, I'm doing my day job, but I got another side business from, 6 to 9, because I got a lot of energy around it and I don't feel like I'm working. So I think that's something, for that I would challenge people to do. There's also an assessment, that I would challenge folks to take as well, and that assessment is that assessment is on. There's a website. Give me 1 second.
Take your time. As you're pulling that up, one thing I want to say to our listeners here is that this is a very, dynamic topic. We talk about wealth. Um, Matt said a lot of great things today in terms of what is wealth, what that looks like, how you are able to identify it and to cultivate it. And so I really want everyone to take a really hard look. If you're here, then that means that this topic is important to you. And I implore you to take action on some of the things that he's giving you right now, because this is going to be very important for our future conversations, but also it will help you understand where you are in your process of where you're trying to get to.
Absolutely. So
Somebody
somebody
asks,
somebody asked what's the assessment, and it's called Working Genius. But the assessment that I was the one that I want everybody to do. So the Working Genius, I want to say it might be like $20 or something like that, but it's worth it. I promise you. But the one that I would also ask everybody to do is, and this is free. It's called wealthscorequiz.com. Wealthscorequiz.com, and that will really help you, and it'll take you 5 minutes to just fill out, and it'll help you to see what area of the 5 types of wealth do you need to focus in on, and then they'll start sending you some tips on how to solve for that area. And so I think that would be a huge win for everybody. And the last kind of just nugget I want to drop is that in terms of value creation, that's what we're talking about today, is how do you create value. And one of the things that is really important is understanding there are 4 levels of value creation. One is implementation, right? So if you can be an implementer. The second is unification. So you're in the management. The third is communication. Okay, so you're inspiring, you're telling stories, you're moving people, and then the fourth is creation or creator. And at each level, you know, you have to understand where are you uniquely gifted, and where are you at there. Now, in fairness, when we move up that value chain ladder, that's where the income increases dramatically. So in the implementation, all the implementers are generally going to be anywhere from 40,000 to maybe about 100,000. The in the unification and management, you're probably going to be anywhere from 80,000 to like 200,000, 250. In the communication, you might be anywhere from 150, 200 to maybe about 1 million, right? And then in creation, you could be anywhere from 150 to infinity, right? And so just think about that. Like, the creators are the people who are building organizations and creating products. Like, think Jeff Bezos, right? And then think communication. These are the people who are inspiring, and you got people who are the actors, and then you got management, whatever. So just think about that, as you think about, like, when you're wanting that raise at work, where are you on that value chain? If you're not inspiring people and communicating well, and maybe that's something you need to work on. And so that's just how we need to be thinking about value creation and increasing our income, which will be the stage to set us up to then have a greater percentage that we can now save and invest. Because I don't want to talk about penny pinching. I want to talk about how do we, we want to live with purpose. We want to build, but we want to maximize. We don't need to talk about, penny pinching. We want to talk about expansion.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. There was something I saw one day. It was a billionaire talking. Forgive me, I can't remember which one of them it was. And he said something about, to our penny pinching. He said, if you think that skipping a cup of coffee today is going to somehow drastically change your financial situation, then you got bigger problems to worry about. And I thought about that. I said, well, yeah, you can't save your way to wealth. I mean, of course, saving is an important strategy, but skipping that one cup of coffee isn't going to turn you into a millionaire, or really have that big of an impact in that sense. Um,
Okay, here now one.
okay. Now let me hit it.
So because you got to play both sides, and here's where
Okay.
this is like the power of like this conversation, right? So I agree with it, but then I'm like, but if
Hmm.
you spend on Starbucks every day, and you in credit cards, maybe you need to just go ahead and go to the grocery store and get a K cups and make your coffee at home. You do need to do that, like, and so there is a balance, like, and we just gotta use that wisdom, because sometimes, like, people lean on that too much, and then they just don't. Now they think they don't have to be disciplined. You can be disciplined and go get the other pieces, and you do both, you increase your probability of success.
Yeah, moderation in all things.
Yeah.
So we have another question in the chat, which actually is a great segue into us just kind of talking about what our next installment of the series is going to be. So next week, same time, same place, we'll be here talking about investment strategies, turning income into ownership, growing our wealth, right? And so the question that we have here, it asks, what is your point of view on dividend, passive income, and security-backed lines of credit? And so, as you're answering that question, just kind of give people an idea of what they can expect in next week's session and how we'll carry this conversation forward.
Yeah. So what is my point of view on dividend passive income? So I think it's overrated. Dividend income, right? One, I have to have a lot of money to get in. I don't know the situation, but you have to have a lot of money to be able to earn enough off of dividends that will be able to, allow you to, depend on it as an income. And so I'd rather someone have a well diversified portfolio that will allow them to gain more appreciation for the long haul. But again, it depends on your goals and your situation. So it's hard for me to give an exact, but it's not bad. The question is like, can we practically do it? And most people can't. That's just a reality. The security backed lines of credit, you know, Amir, you got me?
Yeah, you're back now.
Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, I don't know where you lost me, but the security.
As soon as you started going into security backed lines of credit.
Okay, yeah. So with security backed line of credit, I don't think anything's wrong with it. I do it. However, you have to know that it's a liability, and that you have a requirement to pay that back. But I think it can be a great strategy. The question is just like, what am I using it? I need to either have the right amount of cash flow.
You're back now.
I need to either have the right amount of cash flow that's going to service that line of credit, or I need that can be able to be used to, to be able to pay it back, or when am I getting the resources to pay it back?
Okay. And so, what can we expect from next week's session as we talk about growing wealth? What kind of topics uh, do you plan to cover?
Yeah, so I plan to cover, basically now that we're increased our income, right? We're now earning more, right? Or we're just now have more clarity around how to maximize what we already have. Now we're going to start investing this money, or we're going to start growing it. And we can invest in a lot of different places, right? And the key is we need to have a strategy. We need to have a process. And so when we talk about investing and growing our wealth, we're going to be talking about the different vehicles in which we can choose to invest in, how we need to be thinking about, the market, and what is risk versus volatility. We're going to be talking about making sure that we're how do we become disciplined around growing wealth versus hopeful.
Excellent. I'm definitely looking forward to that discussion. And I want to thank you again for your time, for your expertise. I'm really looking forward to taking our viewers on this journey. And for those of you who listened, if you found value, please share this with somebody, share this recording. It will be uploaded on all of our platforms. Ask somebody to join the conversation. I really think that this is something you should bring your significant others on, bring your children on, bring your families on, because wealth building is a team effort, I would say. Would you agree, Matt?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, without further ado, I say good night to you all and thank you all for joining in, and we will see you next week, 7 p.m.
Take care.